Hello, everyone. It's Mr. Huffman. Good day, good afternoon, good morning, whenever you're watching this. Um, so, today I'm going to talk about kind of the ratification of the Constitution. Now, that might sound like something very dry and very dull. And okay, the Constitutional Convention, they had that. Aren't the states just going to kind of rubber stamp that and pass it off? No big deal, right? Actually, no. Okay. The Constitution is successfully kind of passed at the Constitutional Convention, but now it's going to go to the states, and the states are going to have to decide and vote on changes that they want to see before they adapt it, and they're kind of officially a part of these United States of America. Okay. And the debates that occur during this ratification process are going to have very drastic and I would say dire consequences, okay, both in the immediate and in the long term. Again, some of these very same conflicts that were going on of arguing of, hey, we need to change this or that about the Constitution are very much still raging to this very day. Okay. So again, it was kind of the Constitution was passed successfully in Philadelphia, but now it's got to go out to all the states and they all have to rubber stamp it. Okay. So each state is going to have to get together and elect a convention to then vote on that new Constitution. So you had kind of the major federal constitutional convention, and then you're going to basically have 13 smaller conventions in each state. Okay. So the delegates who were there at the Philadelphia convention are racing back home to their home states to try to organize and influence. Hey, this didn't quite go my way at the convention. Maybe we can try to push for this at the smaller state level. Okay. Now, the provision initially required only 9 out of the 13 states to vote in favor of this Constitution for it to take full effect. So that's not unanimous. They didn't need all 13, but 9 out of 13, that's still, a decent majority to officially kind of adopt this Constitution. Okay. So as you can imagine, debates are going to start raging in these state legislatures, mass meetings, newspapers, everyday conversations. Again, they're not worried about, whatever the president's tweeting on their Twitter feed. They're not worried about kind of the latest news item. Back then, obviously, it was a much different world. So this was the key defining issue. And it would really be for any era, but especially in this era where, not a whole lot's going on. And so the whole debate about this Constitution really is going to be a massive one that occurs all across the various, I'm about to say colonies, but now they're states, right? So again, these state legislatures, mass meetings, newspapers, everyday conversations, everything is geared around, should we adopt this Constitution? If not, what changes should be made to it? Okay. So these debates are really going to create basically the very first two political parties. And no, these parties are not Democrats and Republicans. Okay. Those won't really come along in their kind of proper forms until some decades later. But these first two political parties that do form are going to, in some ways, be the kind of ancestors to the modern day Democratic and Republican parties. Okay, so the first party, really, political party in American history, is going to be the Federalists. Okay, being that their name is the Federalists, they are advocating for a strong central federal government. Okay, where the government is divided between the central governments and regional governments, right? So this idea of federalism. Have the federal government at the top, you have the state governments below that, and then naturally you have kind of your local or city governments under that, right? So you kind of local city, then your state, then the federal. And that there's going to be powers that are shared amongst all three of these, but ultimately the greatest authority is going to be up there with the federal government. Okay. Who are the ones supporting this? Well, large landowners, they're into this, right? Because they're seeking large scale property protections, which they think a massive federal government is going to be able to enforce. Okay. Who else? Merchants and artisans in coastal cities who realize we need stronger trade regulations between us and other nations. We need a big federal government to help facilitate those trade regulations to basically put more money in our pockets. And also farmers near the coasts or rivers who are shipping goods across state lines, right? That they don't want to have a certain standard in one state and then they ship it across to another state and all of a sudden they're dealing with other standards. They're wanting to make sure, hey, it's all across the board. So again, a big federal government can take on all these things. So as you can see, a lot of the federal, people who are federalists are going to be people advocating for naturally a strong federal government because they think that a strong federal government is going to bring the nation together on a kind of a social level, but on a political and economic level as well. It makes it easier to consolidate. So again, federalists, big federal government, but of course the state and local governments have a say as well. But again, ultimately it's all about the federal government, federalism. Okay, so that should be an easy way to remember it, hopefully. On the left here, not Lin-Manuel Miranda, but Alexander Hamilton himself, as well as James Madison here. James Madison's going to start off as a Federalist, but we're going to see over the course of the next few days, he's going to kind of flip-flop and go to the other side, okay? So these are the big ones, kind of really big proponents of this. And again, Hamilton is going to write a lot of defenses of federalism, which I'll talk about here in a moment. And so again, Federalists, they're all for the Constitution as it stands. They don't think there needs to be a whole lot of changes. They think, no, the Constitution that we passed in Philadelphia, you know, maybe a change here or there, but for the most part, we think we did the job, okay? So, again, they're very well organized. Again, as you can see, these people have some money, they have some means, they're super organized, and they have a lot of major wealthy people in America at the time supporting them. Okay, and not the most original name in the book, but the ones who are opposing the Federalists are going to be the anti-Federalists. Okay, now they're not really against federalism per se. They do think we need a federal central government, and then a state government, and then local governments. But they think, you know what, Federalists, they want too much power at the top, that we need states to have a bigger say, right? Because again, most of these anti-federalists, they're Americans, but they still consider themselves more part of their own state, whether that be Virginia, that was a big anti-federalist area, South Carolina, Georgia, North Carolina, wherever. I think they thought of themselves more as like a North Carolinian, right? I'm an American second, but first I'm a North Carolinian, because that's where their history goes back even further, right? So again, sure, we do need a federal government, but the states need to have more power, okay? Also, they were saying, no, we need to make more changes to the Constitution as it stands. Federalists say, no, this is pretty much good as it is. Anti-Federalists, meanwhile, are saying, you know what? No, we need a Bill of Rights. We need some kind of, what it turns out to be 10 amendments that are going to protect the rights of the individual, and also is going to make sure that the federal government isn't getting too much power to use against the states. Okay, so they're saying, no, we need to make more changes. We need a Bill of Rights that's going to make sure people's rights naturally are protected. Now, who were the anti-federalists? Most of them were Western farmers, those farmers that kind of lived more towards the frontier area, right? That they were kind of close to that kind of a proclamation line of 1763, even though that didn't apply anymore. But they're closer to the frontier area, and so they think we need the states or the local governments to have more of a say, because all these people on the East Coast that are really running things, they are not going to understand what's really going on in our area. So that goes back to why they wanted a more state-centric approach, because at the state level, the states are going to have a better understanding and idea of what their individual citizens or residents know better than the federal government, okay? Also, a lot of these people who are anti-federalists thought of themselves as self-sufficient, right? And they thought, we can do it on our own. We can kind of go our own way. And they're especially suspicious of people of wealth and the powerful, okay? Even though there are going to be very wealthy and powerful people that are anti-federalists, they saw themselves as mavericks or renegades, kind of atypical rich people or atypical aristocrats, even though oftentimes they were just as privileged as some of the Federalists, okay? Many of these people are also in debt, some of these Western farmers, and they said, we need a new system that favors creditors, bans paper money, and they thought that many of the people who were in debt thought we need a new system that is not going to favor creditors, ban paper money, or ban farms. And they thought federalism might do that because it's supporting basically the people more at the top. Meanwhile, those at the bottom, they think they're going to be left behind. One of the most prominent early anti-federalists is going to be Patrick Henry. You may have heard of him before. Okay, he was really one of the big anti-federalists at the actual Constitutional Convention. Now, ultimately, as it turns out, the biggest anti-federalist leader is going to be Thomas Jefferson. But when the Constitution was being written, he was actually overseas in Europe. He's going to come back soon after that. But he wasn't the one there kind of at the convention himself. So Patrick Henry is going to be a big proponent and big arguer for anti-federalism, right? So again, anti-federalists aren't saying they're not saying we don't need a federal government. What they are saying, though, is, yeah, we need a federal government, but the states need to have more control. And that's going to really be the biggest division, right? Federalism, federal government needs to be more in control. Anti-federalist states need to be more in control, okay? And again, this is still a battle that's going on to this very day as far as the issues between Democrats and Republicans. Again, they didn't exist quite yet, but Federalists and Anti-Federalists really are the prototypes for the two future parties, okay? So one way that Hamilton and some of his allies are going to argue on behalf of the Constitution and try to argue for federalism is through the Federalist Papers, okay? So this is actually a collection of about 85 essays written by James Madison. Most of them were written by Hamilton, and then also a few by John Jay under the kind of collective pen name Publius, okay? And Publius, that was kind of the name that they put on there, but they all three were kind of using that name. So to everyone reading it, they assumed, oh, this is one person, but actually it was the three of them kind of taking turns writing various things, okay? And they realized how important and influential the New York newspapers were as far as informing the rest of the country. It's kind of similar now as far as the mainstream media is mostly centered in kind of the New York area, right? It goes back even to this time, right? So they're going to mostly target New York newspapers in late 1787 and 1788 to try to realize if we can get them on our side, that's going to kind of filter out through the rest of the country, okay? And is going to set the framework for the debate and explain, hey, this is why the Articles of Confederation failed, and this is how the Constitution is going to fix many of those problems, okay? And again, they were massively persuasive and ultimately are going to do what they said they were going to do in terms of setting the framework for the debate, and they were persuasive in those New York newspapers, which then filtered out through the rest of the country, okay, and are going to ultimately, as I said, be successful. And these Federalist Papers are still very important to us, even now in 2020, in terms of trying to really understand the thought processes of the Founding Fathers. So while it's only really three of our Founding Fathers, the language they use, the terms in which they set the debates, again, very influential to us and still very instructive for understanding how and why they thought certain things, okay? So the Federalist Papers, that's basically going to be the ways through which the Federalists convince over time the rest of the country, hey, this new Constitution, it's not exactly perfect. We can make some changes, but we think this is a good starting point to go from, okay? But that battle for ratification, again, ultimately all up to the states, how they're going to be handled, okay? So the very first state conventions are going to happen in late 1787, going through 1788, okay? Pretty quickly, Delaware, Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Georgia, and Connecticut all quickly get on board, okay? So they quickly ratify. No problems there. Massachusetts, meanwhile, they get on board after they're promised, hey, we will put a Bill of Rights on this, don't worry, okay? And John Hancock vaguely promised Federalists, promised by Federalists that they would support our future run for president from him, okay? And so that's going to get John Hancock on board, which, again, he was from Massachusetts, and he held a lot of sway. So over time, Massachusetts says, okay, you know what? You're going to sign off on this Bill of Rights. That's cool. Okay, and that's not Hamilton, Hancock himself there. Okay. A little bit later, into the year 1788, South Carolina, Maryland, and New Hampshire, they all vote for ratification. So already we got, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. We got 9 already if we want to, right? But the framers realize we don't need just that bare minimum of 9. I know some of you shoot for the bare minimum. Let's actually get more than that. We need everybody on board just to make this look like, it's unanimous and everybody's on the same page, okay? Virginia, meanwhile, as I said, that's going to be a big kind of rallying cry and rallying point for anti-federalists because, again, Virginia is one of the biggest states. They're one of the most influential. They're oldest, right? House of Burgesses, they think of themselves as kind of the first Congress here in America. So they're going to take a lot more convincing. It's a much tougher battle in Virginia. But Washington and Madison, two future presidents, are going to argue very strongly on behalf of making sure that this passes, okay? And in particular, the Bill of Rights are going to be a big sticking point also in Virginia, okay? And after kind of a lot of promises from Washington and Madison and some other Federalists. Washington wasn't exactly a Federalist. He was a little more in the middle, but he's sometimes tended to be a little more federalist. So that's kind of where he falls. They're going to say, no, listen, don't worry. We'll get your Bill of Rights in there. And so that is going to be enough to pass this. But again, if you're looking at the margin in the House of Burgesses, it's only by 10 votes. Okay. So 89 to 79. So that's still a pretty close battle there. Okay. Now, New York nearly didn't vote in favor. Only after hearing that New Hampshire and Virginia did, they finally voted for it. And even again, that vote is 30 to 27. So that's only by 3 votes. So very slim margins in Virginia, even slimmer margins in New York. But again, that's 11 out of the 13 right there, right? So by the end of July of 1788, everyone except for Rhode Island and North Carolina had officially ratified it. North Carolina finally gives in after hearing, okay, there is going to be a Bill of Rights in here, and we're going to officially sign off and ratify it in November of 1789. Rhode Island, meanwhile, they're worried we might be giving up our independence if we do this. We value our independence. That, sure, we fought in this revolution, but we still consider ourselves more Rhode Islanders, right? But that's eventually going to pass in May of 1790 by the slimmest vote yet of 34 to 32. So just barely does Rhode Island get on. But with Rhode Island and North Carolina in now, all 13 original colonies, now states, have ratified and signed off on this declaration. Okay, so the timetable after this happens in 1788, kind of there was enough. At this point, it was like 11 out of 13 by July. And so that was enough to say, okay, we're going to keep working on these other states, but we're going to go ahead and move forward. And they set a timetable for electing this whole new government. So not only are we electing our very first president, we're going to be electing kind of our official Senate members, our official House of Representatives. And again, many of these people had some experience under the Congress of the Articles of Confederation. But again, this is a whole new government, and there's going to be a lot of doubts as to whether or not this whole endeavor is going to work as properly and as clearly as we had hoped. But thankfully, it is. And we'll get into tomorrow. I'm going to get into talking about Washington's election and how that very first government functioned. And we're going to see there's going to be some growing pains through that, but also a good amount of successes. Okay. So this is Mr. Huffman signing off. As always, if you have any questions, please reach out. I'll be happy to answer them. Take care.